I am so enjoying our CEO Speaker Series event. It's an opportunity for us to speak with the leaders for companies in Idaho Falls, to really learn from their experience, their journey, what their philosophies on management and business are, and get a glimpse at the people behind the companies that make our community really great. So up until this point, we've heard from healthcare, media, utilities, business services, and today I'm very excited to have with us an individual who is going to help us take a look at the...
Sorry.
The mic drop is supposed to happen at the end. Just kidding. But to help us take a look at a larger regional bank with multiple branches and really take a look at a new industry for us. I'm going to cheat and read your bio a little bit, Roy, because I don't want to miss anything. Roy Whitehead is the Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer of Washington Federal Regional Bank, headquartered in Seattle, Washington. The company manages $15 billion in assets and 240 offices located in 8 western states. Mr. Whitehead joined Washington Federal in 1998 and has been in the CEO position since 2000. He came to the company from Wells Fargo, where he had served as president of their Colorado bank and its predecessor, First Interstate Bank of Colorado. Prior experience includes serving as the Tampa Bay area president for First Union Corporation and executive vice president and chief credit officer for Texas American Bank in Dallas. He started his career with the Federal Reserve System in 1975. Mr. Whitehead is currently chairman of the Seattle Community Development Roundtable and is the incoming chairman of the Washington Bankers Association. He serves on the board of the United Way of King County, the Washington Roundtable, Year Up, and the Downtown Seattle Association. In 2005, he was appointed by Alan Greenspan to serve on the Industry Advisory Council for the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and 2 years later by Ben Bernanke to serve as president of the council. Mr. Whitehead holds a BA in Finance from the University of South Carolina and is a graduate of Southwestern Graduate School of Banking at Southern Methodist University. Please help me welcome Roy Whitehead.
Thank you.
Okay. And I'm going to try not to wiggle too much myself. In fact, I think I'll take this out of my pocket. Okay. So, hard-hitting expose time, not really. So this is, we'll softball to get going. Tell me a little bit about your background and how did you become CEO at Washington Federal?
Well, my background began probably like many of you in a small town. Happened to be in Ohio, not in Idaho, but I was born on a farm, one of 6 children. I know a lot of people probably look at me today and think that my dad gave me a bank or something and that's how I ended up here, but most of us who end up in positions like this have to earn it along the way, and certainly I would count myself amongst those. Just grew up in an agricultural community like this one, working for a living, baling hay and milking cows and doing whatever one did to put food on the table for the family and a few shekels in my pocket. But I was really fortunate in that I liked to read as a kid, and in the summer on Rural Route 2 in Germantown, Ohio, you could get mail delivered, and I would order the Weekly Reader every year. That was how I spent 50 cents every summer, and would get the Weekly Reader, run to the mailbox to get it. And in the process of doing that, I discovered something called the Wall Street Journal, which my dad would get. And at Rural Route 2 in Germantown, Ohio, it came 2 days late, so you got Monday's edition on Wednesday. And at the time, I thought that I wanted to be a shortstop for the Cincinnati Reds, or any major league team for that matter. But I started reading the Wall Street Journal just for something to do in the summer, and I really enjoyed these stories about these titans of business that were doing all of these transactions and deals and running companies and hiring people and making decisions and so forth. And I went from there and discovered the stock tables. And I figured out after a while that every one of those companies represented on the stock tables had something called a chief executive officer. And there were a lot of those, but in those days there were only 12 starting shortstops on major league teams. And I thought, well, maybe the odds are in favor of this. So I kind of decided that's what I wanted to do. And I say that I was lucky in that I think most people find out what they want to do much later in life and often stumble into it by accident. But from that point forward, I think I might have been 13 or 14 years old, maybe a little younger than that. You know, everything I did was kind of leading toward that. What I studied in college, the jobs that I took, the involvement in the community, everything, you know, was designed to sort of get me this job. And so when I had the opportunity in 1997 to, you know, to join this company to succeed my predecessor, Guy Pinkerton, I was just thrilled beyond belief. So I'm really fortunate to, you know, have achieved my career objective, and hopefully I've contributed a good bit along the way to several companies.
That's great. Wow statistics for Washington Federal.
Yeah, there are quite a few, and it's not a story that is as well known because we are like my new friend Eric's company, Northwestern Mutual Life, which used to be known as the Quiet Company, and we're not very fast or boastful people either, so we tend to just go about our business and do things in the hopes that just by doing business with integrity, treating people fairly, and being successful over a long period of time, people will notice. This is a company that's been around for almost 100 years. On April 24th of next year, we'll celebrate our 100th anniversary. And we have been profitable every single year since at least 1965, which is as far back as our institutional memory goes, because that's when my predecessor started as the CFO of Washington Federal. We sailed through the Great Recession. There were 3 years running when we were more profitable than all of the other banks in the Pacific Northwest combined. Last year, SNL, which is the big number crunching organization for the banking industry that puts out all kinds of metrics and stack ranks on the industry. June 30th of last year, we were of the largest 100 banks in the United States. They had us rated #1 for capital strength, which is probably the single most important measure of a bank's financial strength. So lots and lots of really wild numbers. After we went public in 1982, and we're not quite Microsoft or Starbucks, but we certainly have created our fair share of millionaires around town, particularly in the Seattle area. The total return to our shareholders has been well north of 50 times in terms of the increasing value of the stock, and we have delivered back, I think it's like 36 times their original investment in cash dividends alone. So it's been a massively successful company, and but as I say, one that you know, we kind of build it one brick at a time, and first try to do no harm like the doctors, not make any big mistakes, and always live to fight another day.
Did you mention to me that you are only the 5th CEO at Washington Federal?
In 100 years, I am only the 5th chief executive officer, and I've been in the job for 16 years now, so I'm dragging the average down. Probably the IQ as well.
So we've started down this path a little bit already, but what sets your business apart in the industry? Mm-hmm.
I think there are a number of things. Most importantly is that we are somewhat iconoclastic. We kind of take a look at what the rest of the industry is doing, and given the history of this industry behaving in lemming-type fashion, we say if the industry is doing this, then probably the better path is over here. So if we were boxers, you'd call us a counterpuncher. You know, and you know, one of the buzzwords in business today is best practices. Everybody talks best practices, best practices. Well, there is no one right way to do anything. There are lots of different ways to achieve success in life, and if one wants to be average, just do what everybody else is doing, because that's a sure path to mediocrity. And there's something that feels safe about that too. You know, and you see it with your teenage daughters. You know, if they run with the crowd and everybody's doing it, then how can you really get in very serious trouble, over something that everybody is doing? And I suppose it goes back to the herd nature of, something in our DNA. We've got protection if we're doing things the way everybody else is doing. It takes a lot of courage to behave differently. But we encourage that, we nurture that in our company, and rather than go out and see how everybody else is doing, a particular task or performing around some initiative that we have, or measuring success in a certain way, let's take a look at our business and apply our own knowledge, experience, and abilities to our situation, and figure out what the right way to do it is for Washington Federal. And it's very likely that's not the right way to do it somewhere else. So when you join our company, you have to learn to think backwards. And a good example of that is every mortgage lender that I know in the country now basically has what they call the originate to sell model, which means you borrow money for a mortgage loan from a mortgage broker or a bank or a credit union somewhere. They sell it off to the government, to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, into the secondary market. We don't sell anything into the secondary market, and this may sound a little harsh, but it's something we believe. We think the secondary market is corrupt, and we think it's bad for society. We think the old-fashioned way is a better way to do it. If one knows that one has to collect the loan that one makes, one is far more likely to make a good loan to begin with and not put you in harm's way. Whereas if you're just raking off a fee, I'm probably offending a few people in the room, but if you're just raking off a fee and selling off all the risk, where's the skin in the game? So it's an expression of our values. We really believe in doing business with integrity, treating people fairly. That is always at the top of the list. But also being different, because we know that in order to be great, one has to be different in some way, shape, or form. But never taking so much risk that you put the whole enterprise at risk.
So that just tees us right up for the most important business principle in your organization.
Well, I will be redundant and say that it's integrity. I think it was Warren Buffett who first said, and I'm not above stealing a good idea, so I say this all the time, we can afford to lose a little money from time to time, but what we cannot afford to lose is our most important asset, and that's our reputation. So do the right thing. It all starts with integrity, and if we have to refund some fee that somebody thinks that we didn't deserve to achieve, and it costs us a couple of $100s, this year we'll make $150 or $160 million. If we collect that fee, we'll make $150 or $160 million. So do the right thing. And integrity is definitely and clearly would be number one. Number two would be think for the long term. Don't get too caught up in what's happening in the moment. And always conserve enough in the way of resources so that you can fund your way through any crisis that might develop. It's the reason that we are number one in terms of our capital position in the industry, as we run the bank, not so much for today, but for 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years, always with a weather eye out for that next economic storm. We don't know where it's coming from, we don't know what the intensity will be, but we want to have enough in the way of wherewithal on our balance sheet that if every bank in the United States goes out of business, we'll be the last one. And if I may, Michelle, I know this is a long answer, and we should always beware of the long answers, but one of the important things for your community is that banks be well capitalized and very well funded, because capital doesn't mean very much in good times, but when times get tough, if you've got a bank that's scrambling around for capital, they have no choice but to kick you to the curb and do whatever they need to do to survive on their own. We had plenty of capital going into the downturn. We stayed profitable all the way through, so we were able to work with our clients to bridge them over between the two up cycles through that heart of darkness that we all went through. And in some cases, I can recall a couple of companies, for example, that one comes to mind that owed us $30 million. And they essentially were broke, but we dug into it with them and determined that they could continue to service about $10 million. So we were charged off $20 million, and created a new note for $10 million with the idea that we'll put that $20 million on the shelf, and when times get better, every widget that you sell, you'll get half the profit, we'll get half the profit until we've repaid, until all that money has been repaid. They were overjoyed. We were able to do it, and I believe this month we will get back the last nickel that was part of that arrangement. So, you run around chasing, the cheapest checking account or the cheapest loan rate or whatever. You really should be thinking about, where that financial partner is going to be when times get difficult, and that's a huge differentiator for us in the market. So that's how I would answer that question.
That was a worthy long answer.
Okay.
Banking, of course, is highly competitive, highly regulated. So as the CEO, how do you determine what is that best path forward for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think strategy is really becoming very, very important. It's always been important. But consumer behaviors are changing so radically, and the way businesses use banks today is changing so radically that how one decides to invest the resources necessary to deliver banking services in the way that consumers and businesses want them today and in the future, I think is going to be probably the most difficult decisions that any of us have to make. And the fear, of course, is because technology is changing so rapidly, and I know you've got some technology people in the room today, that you make the investment and it turns out 3 years from now that you invested in VHS when the world goes beta. So those are the most nerve-wracking decisions that I think we're making right now, is how to invest in technology and what to do with all of this brick and mortar that we have. You've all had this experience, particularly those of you who are as old as I am. You'll remember 30 years ago we all went down to the bank on Friday afternoon to deposit our paycheck and to get a little cash for the weekend. And there were lines out the door at the banks. We had to open on Saturdays to accommodate all the traffic. And now people just don't go to the bank. Everything is automated. And so figuring out what to do with brick and mortar vis-a-vis electronic delivery, I think those are going to be the most important decisions that we make. I think the other thing that is really challenging right now is the regulatory environment. And we are so pleased that we have great relationships with our alphabet soup of regulators. They are with us all the time. For the most part, they're constructive. We remember that they've got a job to do as well, and we think it's a competitive advantage if we can have a great relationship with the regulators, as opposed to have them standing in the way, questioning our motivations and the way we're treating our customers, and stopping us from being innovative and doing business in the way that we think it should be done. So strategy is becoming really important, and and this is an evolving thing. I do think that while the products may change and the delivery of our products may change, the one thing that will not change in our company are the values by which we manage the business. So,
what's the biggest mistake you ever made in business, and what did that experience teach you?
Well, the biggest mistake I ever made in business. The biggest mistake I've made in business, and it's kind of a toss-up, but they're related. The biggest mistake that I ever made in business was that on a Sunday afternoon in 2008, the Federal Reserve called in the CEOs of the 12 largest banks in the United States and said, you are going to take, one of you is broke, and Citigroup, and the rest of you are okay, but in order to preserve stability and to keep panic from ensuing, we've created this thing called TARP. And so we are going to inject money into every one of your banks, and you're going to take it, and you're going to sign up right here, right now for it before you leave. And of course, there were some people who were pretty unhappy about that because they didn't need it, but they really had no choice under the circumstances. So they did. The next day, I got a call from the U.S. Treasury at 8 o'clock in the morning and said, we have identified 22 very healthy regional banks in the United States of America, and you know about the TARP program. We closed on with the 12 largest banks yesterday, And we want the 22 regional banks that we've identified to take it as well, because we want this program to appear democratic, and we want to do it so that people are absolutely confident in the future of our economic system, and basically appeal to our patriotism to take it. And so we had a board meeting that afternoon, and the board decided, hey, when Uncle Sam calls and they tell you that there's a need, then you help. You step up and you help. So we did. Within probably 3 weeks, Congress completely lost control of the public attitude towards that program, and it became a bailout the banks program. And we literally had people snooping around our bank looking to see whether we were eating caviar and drinking champagne and this kind of thing, and reporting any little. If we put up a new sign somewhere, they would report it because we'd been bailed out by the government and taken that money. So we tried to pay it back. A month after we took it, we tried to pay it back, and they wouldn't take it because we wanted nothing to do with this. It wasn't what they sold us on. And it was May of the following year, 2009, before we could repay it. It cost us about 17.5%. To take that money at a time when we could have borrowed money all day long at 1%. We had absolutely no need for it. And since then, what I've learned is beware of the government bearing gifts. That would be the biggest mistake that I've made in my career. And we're still trying to recover from that. There are still people that point to us and say, you got bailed out. You were one of the banks that took TARP. And so the perspective on it is very different in the mind of the public than the reality of the circumstances at the time the program was put together. So,
interesting. This is my self-serving question. Mm-hmm. Washington Federal is a member of the local Chamber of Commerce, and I'm sure several local chambers of commerce. Why do you support your branch's participation with their local chambers?
Yeah, well, the chamber in most communities is the single best voice, and in many cases the only voice for business. And we can all stand alone and try to get things done that are good for business, but it is unlikely, given how vast the differences are today in our society, that a single voice acting alone can really affect change that's positive. And I think collectively, though, through chambers, we're able to do that. It's more important today than it's ever been. Business is not perceived in the same way it was when I was growing up, and the people that ran the businesses and owned the businesses and the banks in the community where I grew up were the people that you looked up to. They were the icons. They were the ones that kept everything stitched together, and they were the ones that the community turned to whenever there was some particular challenge. And today, things have changed to the point where somehow we're all seen as being motivated purely by immodest kinds of things, greed and the like. We in business know that's not the case. And in fact, we all know, don't we, that if we don't provide some product or a service that society needs, we'll cease to exist. If we're not glomming on to some societal need out there, then there's no place for us. So you treat your customers in a way that they shouldn't be treated, you won't last very long, because somebody else will figure out how to do it, in the right way at the right price. So that's the reason that we support the chamber. And the other reason is it's a great business development vehicle. Early in my career, and when I was in Dallas, I joined the part of that organization, which is a great chamber. It was huge. I had this thing called the Rustlers Club, and those were the young people that went out to convince businesses in town to join the chamber. And you got a badge if you sold so many memberships and so forth. But it was such a great experience for me because I met so many people, and I got to call on businesses in kind of a friendly way, where I wasn't pitching my bank, but I was selling them on the chamber. And that gave me the opportunity later on to go back to them and talk a little bit about banking. So I think it's also a good networking tool and a great business development opportunity for our people as well. We want them out there.
That's great. I know we
you like that answer?
I do. I love that answer. Well, and I know we have a few of our chamber ambassadors here in the audience today too, and I think they would say the same, that it's been a great opportunity for them to get connected in the community. Okay, enough chamber commercial. Who's your business role model?
Who's my business role model? I think like so many people in the room, it probably would be Warren Buffett. I had the incredible opportunity to spend about a half a day with him once, and this would have been almost 20 years ago now, maybe 15 years ago, right after I became a CEO. And it was just he and I and a couple of other fellows talking business, and he's hilarious, by the way. This man is the thing. He could be a stand-up comedian if he wanted to be. He had us in stitches all the way through lunch. But the instant it came time to talk business, we adjourned from the table and we went into the living room of this house where we were. It was like a light switch had been flipped, and he was deadly serious and mind like a razor sharp. And we got right down to it, right down to brass tacks. And things didn't work out on this particular transaction, but as we were leaving, I asked him if I could spend a few more minutes with him, and he was gracious enough to do that. So I asked him about how I should, I'm a new CEO, how should I be thinking about running this company, and what lessons have you learned that you could share with me? And he told me that the single thing that has been most important to me in my job as CEO of Washington Federal, and I recall this almost every week, if not every day. He said, Roy, run the business like it's the only asset your family will ever own, and they've got to live off of it forever. And I thought, that is really powerful. So that's the thing that keeps me focused on the long term and not the short term, and keeps me from taking shots from half court and taking risks that aren't appropriate to the kind of returns that we generate in our business. So he would be my role model.
You did want me to ask you about the advice you received from a former boss and spinach.
Oh yeah, he was a great mentor too. His name is Frank Dunn, and this was when I was in Florida, and there are a million Frank Dunn stories, but he at the time was probably 54 years old, and he had designed his life, by the way. He was going to work until he was 55, and then he was going to quit, and he was going to go teach 8th graders. And he did it. He went to teach 8th graders. He did that for the next 10 years. Amazing human being, but he's very Southern. Smoked cigarettes like crazy, back when we smoked cigarettes in the office and so forth. But one of the stories, I was out, and he just had such an interesting way about kind of reeling you in when he wanted to. And I'd been out on a business call with him one day, and we're driving back, and he said, Roy, let me ask you something. He said, if you were at a dinner party and you looked over and your wife had spinach on her teeth, would you tell her? And I said, well, of course I would tell her. And he said, well, why? And I said, well, because I love her and I wouldn't want her to be embarrassed. And he said, I am so glad you feel that way, because he said, you've got a bunch of spinach on you. And he said, I need to tell you about it. And he used that as a way to soften me up so that he could give me some criticism, some coaching that otherwise I wouldn't probably have received in the way that I did. And so I've used that a couple of times, probably not on any of my colleagues here, but.
That's great. So as the leader of a large organization with multiple locations, how do you stay connected to your employees?
Oh gosh, in a variety of different ways. I have just completed what we call our spring rounds, in which I go once a year. Used to do it twice a year, but we've gotten too big for that for every single one of our geographies. And I think we had about 13 stops this year. All of the officers come in to meet with us, and we provide an update on the business and our strategy and kind of a state of the company address. And then I ask them what it is that they would like to hear from me about. And because when people ask you questions, they're really telling more about them, revealing more about themselves than they are anything else. So by the questions that they ask, I know what they're interested in and where the friction is and where the trouble is that they're having in doing their jobs day to day. So that's probably the most valuable thing that we do during the course of the year. We have a leadership academy that we bring a dozen of our top people through every year, and all of us have an opportunity to teach there and get a little closer to our senior people. I used to interview every single applicant for an officer position in the company. We've gotten a little too big for that. We have newsletters, we use email. Occasionally I will video something in the way of a message to broadcast and go out. We have town hall meetings at corporate headquarters periodically. Go to the lunchroom. Gosh, go down to the lunchroom. That's the hotbed of revolution in every company. So go down and sit down and have coffee with folks and eat a sandwich. You learn a lot in that environment as well. So some formal ways, informal ways. I don't know that I have any magic bullet in that regard, other than you just got to be visible and be informal, be casual, be approachable. And that's the highest compliment that anybody in our company can pay me, and I hope all of my colleagues here would say that today, is that Roy's a very approachable person. So the minute you start thinking you're all that, people see right through it, and then it becomes about your agenda, not about the company's agenda, and you're doomed to failure then.
I will tell you that your employees did say that.
Good.
When we got ready to do our phone interview to prepare for today, they said, "Oh, when you talk to him, you'll love him. He is great." So there you go. Y'all can pay me later.
Thanks,
guys. What experience do you believe helped you grow most as a leader?
I think it was doing a lot of crummy jobs growing up. When you work for a living and do those really hard, backbreaking jobs for a little bit of money, you learn a lot about work ethic. You learn a lot about people. You learn how different folks manage, and you can learn from that. I ran out of money my junior year of college, and in those days, I never thought about it. And I don't know of anybody who did. You were lucky enough to have your parents pay for your school, or you had a scholarship of some sort, or you worked and paid for school, and I was the latter. And my junior year of college, I ran out of money, so I had to quit for about 6 months, so I could get my grub stake going again. And I remember being in a room. I was a painter that 6 months for the most part, and we were doing a dormitory, and they put what's known as a sand finish on the walls, which means they just sprinkled sand in the paint, and we sprayed it on. And then somebody said, no, these rooms weren't supposed to have a sand finish. So the only way you can remove a sand finish is to sand it off. And so I'm standing in room after room after room, sanding off a sand finish. And the place is just filled with dust, and goodness knows what I'm putting in my lungs. I said, when I get back in school, I'm going to be a star. I'm not going to do this for the rest of my life. And that was probably the biggest motivator that I have. It really changed my life after that experience. But I think there's no moment in time when you have the big lesson. Life and a career are all about the slow aggregation of skills over a long period of time. And this is the toughest thing we have with young people, is to getting them to appreciate when they join us that they're really not worth anything. We'll pay you while you learn, because we feel that there's going to be a return down the road. And I get such a kick out of these young people that will come in and they'll say, Mr. Whitehead, I need a raise. And I said, well, why do you need a raise? Well, I just bought a house. Or I just bought a car, or I just had a baby. Okay, well, God, congratulations, but now how does that make you more valuable to the company? So it's just a steady, as I say, aggregation of experiences that lead to the skills that can allow you to have any sort of a good job, I think, in our society. And I wish we could get back to that. Where people realize it's all about work ethic. We've been studying in our company something called locus of control, and in locus of control, locus just means location, place of control, and people either have an internal locus of control or an external locus of control, or somewhere on that band. But those with an internal locus of control believe that it is their effort, their hard work, their contribution, the attributes and the skills they bring to bear to a particular project that will determine their success, or the outcomes that they have in life. Those with an external locus of control tend to think it's fate, it's accident, everything, it's all beyond my control. And there's too much of that in society now. too many victims, too many people that have not made that connection between hard work and outcomes, which was a given when I was a kid, and probably that's an Idaho Falls ethic, I'm guessing, because of the agricultural nature of this community. I just wish we could get a little more of that back in our society. There's too much of, wanting it now, and it's who you know, not what you know, and results that are unrelated to effort and to hard work.
Very true. As I listen to you share that, the thought goes through my mind of the application I received in recent years doing hiring, where an individual provided their personal budget to justify the wage they thought they needed.
I haven't had that one yet.
That was a first.
Yeah.
That was a first. The line item for shoes alone for a male was incredible.
Well, we have our needs.
So, when you need advice, who do you turn to?
Well, without a doubt, the first place I go is to my board of directors. They're the ones who honor me by allowing me to continue in this job. And for those of you who might be skeptical about it, if our company is any indication, boards of directors take their jobs very, very seriously. It is not a cakewalk for them. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of liability associated with it. They are really serious about their jobs, and they study our company and talk with me extensively. But they are just so supportive, and never give me advice that's not in the best interest of our company, and they're very, very thoughtful about it. I'm amazed at how seriously they take those jobs, and how little they get back in return for it. So that's the first place that I go. From a career standpoint, I think many of us turn to our spouse, and that's true for me. My wife is, really good at helping me to think through, the 3 or 4 times I've changed jobs in my career, whether that was the right thing to do or not. And then I think I told you on the phone the other day that I carry my parents around in my head too, as my internal board of directors. Your parents are, that's true love. Your parents will never give you bad advice, because they don't care about anything but your happiness. And so I carry them around in my head too, and occasionally I'll turn to them and pose a question to them, and hopefully the answer I get back is the one that they would actually give me, and not the one that I hope that they would give me, but but that's a little trick I have as well.
What's the best risk you ever took?
The best risk that I ever took was taking this job. That was the best risk that I ever took. The second best risk I ever had, and I didn't know it at the time, I didn't know it till 3 or 4 years ago, but in about 1985, a closely held company that I banked, the CEO and the owner died. Instantly, suddenly, was just gone, no succession plan whatsoever. And there was the lawyer for the company stepped in, who I had known, and had been asked by the wife to take on the role of running the company. We could have liquidated it and gotten out whole. He asked us to stay with the company, and ultimately we agreed to do that. It was pretty risky because he'd never run a business like this before. And I got a call from him, must have this 25 years later, and he said, "Roy, I have been trying to find you for 20 years to say thanks." He said, "You don't know what has happened to our company and my life and my family's life since you made that decision to stand by us." And he went through all the things that he had been able to accomplish, put his kids through school, set up some scholarships, now employed 300 people instead of the 30 people they had at the time, had just given $1 million to his church. And he said, and it's, and of course it wasn't, but he said, all this is because of you. And so, as I think back on my deathbed about all the wonderful things that, I experienced as a banker, that call will, be kind of right at the top of the list, because it was so unexpected. So it was fun.
That's great. If you could start over knowing what you know now, what would you do differently?
I would have been a little more patient, I think, early in my career. I guess I wasn't that different than the young people we deal with today. I was, I wanted to move up. I wanted to accomplish things, and so that might be the one thing I would do it a little differently in hindsight. And I probably would have started earlier in my career, mentoring folks, because I found out later in my career how much I enjoyed that, and I liked it, and I got back more, of course, than I was giving. But yeah, I'd say that's probably the one thing that I would change in my career. But you've heard it, and it's a little trite. You don't know while you're going along until it's all over, and you look back. You've been painting this picture, and you just see splotches of it along the way that look like random colors, and then at the end it's kind of, wow, that's pretty good. That's been a good life. So I don't have many regrets from my time in the banking business. It's been great.
We've got just a couple of more questions before we'll turn to the audience and let them ask a couple of questions. What advice would you give to a small business owner looking to grow?
Well, what we often see is that small businesses are started by salespeople. And they are really great. They figure out, I can go get the business and I know how to do it, and they are really, really good at it. And what we often see is that they will race off and leave the rest of the company in the starting blocks. And the next thing you know, you've got more orders than you can fill, or you don't have the operational infrastructure to maintain control over quality of delivery, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I would suggest, A, is make certain you've got a good business plan and have a respect for all of the cogs in the wheel. It's not all about revenues. In fact, one of the acid tests I had when I was a lender, considering whether to bank a company or not, is, tell me how your company's doing. And if they immediately started talking about revenues, that was a red flag. But if they started talking about profits, that's somebody I want to bank. So I would be careful about growing too fast. Make sure you've got the infrastructure in place to manage that growth, and most critically, make certain you've got the funding in place to fund that growth. Don't go rush out and get the growth and leverage yourself up and think, well, I can get the money because this is a great business. Capital is really hard to get when you really need it. It's pretty easy to get when you don't need it, but when you're under pressure and you really need it, it's tough, and you're going to end up paying the price for that. The other heads up that I would give everybody in this room today, and I think there's widespread awareness around it, hopefully, is that this cybersecurity issue is real. And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to be targeted. We had just last week, and I love telling these horror stories. It's like if you own a chainsaw, you ought to hear a story about a guy who cut his arm off, so you have respect for the tool. This company has banked with us for 30 years, and this fellow did business in China, and occasionally when he was over there, he would buy some art. Well, somebody commandeered his email address, took it over, and began monitoring the email traffic in his company, figured out he was in China, figured out he liked art, figured out who was responsible for keeping the checkbook, and sent 3 emails to the bookkeeper there, wire $300,000 to such and such a place in China. I've got a piece of art that I picked out over here. He got back, and thank goodness our folks, to their credit, they questioned the transactions because they were out of the ordinary. Said, "Are you sure?" And she said, "Oh no, he does this all the time. This is this is common." So he got back and said, one of the things we need to do is pay our taxes. And she said, "Well, what account would you like for me to pay that out of?" And she said, "Well, let's pay it out of the Washington Federal operating account." And she said, "Well, can't do that because you spent all that money when you were overseas." And he said, "What?" She had wired $650,000 to China, with these based upon these phishing emails. Our CFO tells me that twice a week at least he gets emails allegedly from me asking him to wire money somewhere. And they're just so sophisticated. And by the way, we have layer upon layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of security around our network and our system. Nobody has ever penetrated our system. Our weakest link is us, though, and the technology guys will tell you that. through what they call social engineering, because we are trusting human beings. We like people, and grew up in the way that you were supposed to trust people, and we're in a service business, so you tend to be trusting, and we're the ones that can be fooled. And we're social engineering all the time, and I probably shouldn't say this, but hopefully it's never ever going to happen again. But there have been many instances in which we have sent in somebody posing as somebody from the telephone company. Hey, I'm from CenturyLink. I need to get in and look at your telecom equipment, and we'll go get them a cup of coffee and a donut while they install a monitoring device on our network. So if you're not doing that kind of testing all the time and don't have controls in place, and you're not talking about cybersecurity, you should be. And if you are a small business, the most important controls that you can have are the old-fashioned controls. Dual controls over your checkbook. Don't have the same person writing the checks and making the deposits, that have somebody else to balance the account every month. Make certain that you've got manual out-of-band controls. We don't wire money out for anybody in our company unless we call them back first. They can't call us. We've got their number, so we call them back. We verify every single wire before it goes out with a manual phone call back to the sender. And these are the best controls we've had. You can layer in all these technology tools and so forth and so on, but the old-fashioned way works. Just works best 9 out of 10 times. So.
For those of you that are here, our 2020 Vision for Business speaker later in June is Brent Stacy from the Idaho National Laboratory, talking about cybersecurity and control for small business. So we hope you'll come and join us for that. Thank you for that tee-up for our next lunch. Last question. What advice would you give to a young professional with aspirations of one day being a CEO in their own right?
I would say volunteer for everything. Whenever a group is called together and the boss says, "Hey, this is something that needs to be done. Anybody know how to do this?" Yeah, I can do that, and you'll figure it out. And by doing so, you'll gain the confidence that's necessary to take risk in life, and make certain that you have. Motivation is something that's learned over time. And one of the ways you can do that is by taking risk and making choices and developing that internal locus of control to convince yourself that hard work does lead to good outcomes. The other thing we have to do is make certain we know why we're doing what we're doing. Answer that. Why do you get up every day and go to work? What are you doing this for? And for most of us, it's the answer would be something like, I'm trying to make a better life for my family. I want to give my kids a good education. My family's growing. We need a house. And if you can answer that question and kind of figure out that it's not about the money and it's not about the work, it's about this other thing that's outside of you and bigger than you are, then the work that you're doing, the tasks that you're doing every day, don't become just chores anymore, but something that's leading to something else. So that's probably the best advice that I would give. And guard your reputation, like it is what it is, which is the most valuable asset that you've got. Do the right thing. Be honest. Do integrity. Make a mistake, fess up. Get it out in the sunlight where everybody can deal with it. That's how you build credibility. So these are some of the things that I think go into shaping the life of someone who wants to get a job like the one that I have today. So.
Great. Okay, we're going to turn up the house lights a little bit so I can see everybody, and we'll open it up to some questions from you.
I know some of you.
Okay, anybody have a question they'd like to ask? Oh, I know you got some. Garth always has a question. Natalie.
You know, I would address that by giving you an example that I just experienced recently. I had we were talking about this whole motivation thing and work ethic and internal locus of control, and one of our branch managers came up to me and said, Roy, I don't care what you say. I've got employees that work in my branch. They are not going to take any risk. They are not going to make any choices. They're going to defer everything to me. They're not going to do anything more than is absolutely required. You know, showing up 8 and at 8 o'clock and leaving at 5 and doing the minimum. And I said, well, let's think about this. I said, they've got to be motivated by something. And my guess is that they are motivated by security. That something happened in their life somewhere along the way that created they took a risk and it didn't work out for them the way that they thought. Adverse consequences resulted. And maybe this has happened multiple times in their life, so now they're motivated by security. It's going to be your job to explain to them through their unwillingness to take a little risk, make decisions, work hard, get better. They are putting that very security that motivates them at risk. So, I don't know if that exactly fits the question you're asking, but it's one that I just recently experienced that pops to mind. So perhaps that's helpful. Everybody's motivated by something. Yeah, it's a fascinating business model, and I think there's a real possibility that there could be a role for a cyber currency. And by the way, there are dozens of them. You probably know that. Bitcoin is the one that's best known. And there is I've forgotten what country it is in Africa, but they have no banking system. And so they developed their own, the citizens just spontaneously developed their own medium of exchange, and it turned out to be cell phone minutes. So if you needed to barter for milk, instead of trading, some other good that you might have, you would trade cell phone minutes. And a whole economy began, was built around cell phone minutes. And I've forgotten what country that is in Africa, but that's what inspired the cryptocurrency folks to start thinking about something that was outside of the central banking system of the major governments in the world, that would be controlled in a different way by users and would be more transparent than the mechanisms that we have today, which are obviously subject to manipulation. All you have to do is look at what the Fed's been doing for the last 5 or 6 years and what Japan is doing in the central banks in Europe. And that's dangerous because they don't know what they're doing. And it's not that they're not smart people, it's just that these are experiments that are new and have never been tried before. And Bitcoin, I think, might have a future. The issue, of course, is trust and whether or not it really is a fully transparent, non-hackable system or not. But it may be that more important than Bitcoin and the cyber currencies is the underlying technology on that platform, the blockchain technology that Bitcoin runs on. There's not a big bank in the world that's not investing a lot right now in blockchain technology as a better way, a faster, more transparent, cheaper way to record transactions than the way that we're doing it right now. You probably think that money is working 24/7 all the time. And most millennials would just assume, most people would assume that you can transact business in cash 24/7. The Fed is not open Saturdays and Sundays. They're not open 24 hours during the week. So there's a point in time when transactions are just stacking up all through the system, and then they get cleared when the Fed opens back up. With the blockchain technology, you can go 24/7, 365, recording all kinds of transactions, whether they're insurance policies or title companies. You could probably make title insurance obsolete by use of blockchain technology for recording real estate transactions. So I think the underlying technology definitely holds a lot of promise, and maybe the cyber currencies have a place in the future as well. I mean, there are something like 270,000 businesses in the world now that will accept Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. You still have to convert it back to local currency at some point, but But it's, you know, it's got a place.
Interesting. Any other questions? Garth.
So you talked about not making rash decisions, not shooting from half court, that sort of thing. And things are changing so fast now that it's got to compress the horizon that you're planning to. So what are some of the other parameters you use to balance that? Because if you delay a decision that you might get left behind, I know you don't want to do what everybody else is doing, but that still means you're looking forward. You've got to be doing
That's right.
what is right for the company, what's right for your clients, but in a proactive way, in a reactive way. Otherwise, you end up doing what everybody else is doing.
Yeah. You know, we are fortunate to be in a really strong financial position. And the old rule that we always applied was wait as long as you can to make an important decision, because the longer you can wait, the better data you'll have, because things are evolving all the time. And I think that rule still holds true, but the time frame is compressed, and at some point you do have to jump. And I will share with you that we jumped on the technology front 2 years ago and committed to a new system that we installed. We'd been operating on a 30-year-old homegrown COBOL-based system that we built in 1980, and we converted to a new state-of-the-art 24/7 real-time system in November of last year. And that system has it's got a 7-year term commitment on it, and we know by the time the end of that 7 years rolls around that you know, that system may be obsolete. We may all be operating on the blockchain then, but I don't know. It just doesn't seem like it's going to change that fast. And if it does, there are some tweaks and some applications we can bring to bear around that core operating system to, you know, to take advantage of emerging technologies. But yeah, you're absolutely right about that, and I would readily concede that we don't have the luxury of time that we once did with some of these decisions, and therefore the risk is more elevated than it was that you'll make a bad decision as opposed to a good decision. So there's just no way around that.
So you mentioned central banks, and what they're doing is experimental, yet a heck of a lot of them are doing it in just a massive way. So at some point, you and other banks that aren't the central banks, you have to deal with the fallout of that. So
yeah.
How do you protect yourself from that nonsense?
Just stay very nimble. Keep a lot of capital. Don't get too leveraged. Don't get concentrated in any one industry. I happen to think within the real estate environment there are a couple of bubble-icious areas that we should dial back on. Make sure we're well diversified. Have a good solid funding base so that your funding doesn't dry up overnight. And just stay nimble, because this is an experiment that, I mean, it's really a beggar thy neighbor approach. You know, it's a race to the bottom right now. Everybody's trying to cheapen their currency so that they've got a competitive advantage in the export market to create jobs in their own community, and it's doomed to failure. I mean, it's not going to work for everybody. It can't work for everybody, and I'm kind of proud of our Fed for stepping up, and now at least trying to get rates moved up a bit. But there will be a price to pay. I'd stay away from bonds right now. As you probably know, bonds decrease in value when rates go up, and increase in value when rates go down. We're letting our mortgage-backed securities portfolio run off because today you can go out and you have to pay a premium to buy a mortgage-backed security that will yield 2.2%. If that's a 30-year instrument, I don't think that's a very smart thing to do. So I think it's all about leaving earnings on the table now to make sure you've got plenty of wherewithal to survive. The board asks me all the time, you know, how can we become more profitable? Oh, you want to be more profitable? We can do that tomorrow. All I have to do is go out and leverage up and you know, buy a bunch of securities and make more loans and so forth. But is that really what you want me to do? It may be great for the next 6 months or the next year or the next 2 years, but then, you know, we could be back in 08, 09 could be back in the Great Recession once again. And so, you know, leave earnings on the table now. Make sure you've got enough wherewithal to, you know, to survive for the longer term, I think is kind of the key there. It's tough. It's hard to watch it. It's hard to watch what's happening with central banks around the world right now.
It is. It's a fabricated economy, and savers are punished. They have nowhere to put their money.
Yeah.
And so companies are buying back the stock, driving up the price artificially. It is a crisis.
Yeah. Everybody's having to take more risk to get you know, to get a bit more yield, and a lot of people are putting money into hard assets to guard against inflation and so forth. It's a scary time right now, and let us never lose sight of the fact that that our government is probably more leveraged than, you know, any other entity on the you know, in the United States. We have almost we'll probably be at 20 trillion in debt, just counting the on the books debt at the federal level within a year or so. If you added up all of the assets owned by all of the banks in the United States, you might get to 16 trillion. So if we could liquidate all the banks, we wouldn't have enough money to pay off our national debt. And I could go on with you know, with these statistics. There are probably maybe 8 trillion in mutual funds in the United States, and you know, it's a staggering amount of debt, and we're going to pay the price for that down the road too. And everybody keeps telling me that it's not a problem. Well, it is a problem, and it might not be a problem for me, but it's going to be a problem for my kids and my grandkids. And it's going to curtail, you know, the opportunity that they have. I think it's already curtailing opportunity in the United States. So hold our government accountable for that. How are they going to deal with all this debt?
Nothing like a good crisis to increase central power.
Yep. I'll close on a funny story.
Okay.
If you're ready for that.
I'm ready.
So the first time I came to Idaho Falls was about 16 years ago. I'd just become the chief executive officer, and so I was making the rounds, and the folks here, that we had a fellow by the name of Larry Wadsworth, who's a great character. I don't know if anybody know Larry. Great character. I've got a million Larry Wadsworth stories too. And but anyway, he had this little reception for me, and one of the people who came was the president of what then was known as Ricks College, now BYU Idaho. And he came and he brought me a couple of really nice shirts. And they had Ricks, you know, up here on the chest, and then underneath in little letters, college was written. So when I got back to Seattle, I was pretty proud of those shirts. And, you know, I started wearing them around town, and had one that was a t-shirt. I was a runner, so I'd wear it out running and with my buddies and so forth. And after about 3 or 4 months, one of my colleagues came up to me and said, "That's a nice t-shirt. Where'd you get that?" And so I told him the story. And he said, "Well, that's really great." He said, "You're CEO of a bank, right?" Yeah. And he said, "Well, do you know what Rick's is here in Seattle?" And I'd only had moved to. I said, "No, I don't." He said, "It's a strip club, Roy." You might not want to be wearing that big Rick's around town. So every time I come here, I think about that. So.
Oh, that is great. That is great. And a perfect note to end on. Roy, thank you so much for coming and visiting with us today. Thank you all for coming. I hope you'll join us downstairs for Business After Hours, hosted by Washington Federal. Thank you for that. And I also want to thank our CEO Speaker Series sponsor, EastIdahoNews.com. As I mentioned, they are filming our interview today, and we'll have that available on the internet in the next week. So for those who were not able to join us in person today, they'll be able to experience the interview later. Thank you also to the Arts Council for hosting us in their facility. So with that, join us downstairs, and thank you so much.
Thank you.